Check. Check.
Testing. Testing. Check.
Good morning. Welcome to the second day of Check 2018. I'm Michael Rain. I'm with the College of Business at Kansas State University, and I have the privilege of introducing our next presentation. Boy, there's quite an echo.
Yeah, we're getting a second mic feed through the speakers here.
Is that because of Zoom or? Can you hear that echo? How about that?
I'm off. Are you off? Yeah.
Okay. So how many IT folks does it take to mute the microphone? Scene 1, 2. There, I think we've got it, right? Okay, back where we were. I have the privilege of introducing our next speakers this morning. We're going to talk about change management, and because we're talking about change management, we're going to change who's presenting. So you can see that Greg Dressman was originally going to be a part of the presentation. He can't come today, so we have a group effort. We have Michael Speirs from K-State. We have Scott Finkeldye and Vernon. All are going to kind of contribute to the presentation this morning. So please help me in welcoming them.
I'm going to say real quickly that Greg Dressman is our director of our enterprise server technologies, and he's the one coordinating our response to the fire and hail library. For an update for everyone, because I know a lot of people are interested, and we really appreciate your interest and your support. They've been able to get into the library today. They're letting more people into the library. They've started to evaluate some of the danger of the structure and other things. They're still not letting lots of people in, but we've been able to get some people in. Those of you that know about the Great Room, which is the oldest part of the library, has some historic WPA murals and other things. They've been able to evaluate a lot of that, and apparently a lot of that has come out better than we were worried about. The murals, I know a specific detail about. They had, about 5 years ago, we had done some restoration on those, and they put up some special molding whose job it was to direct water away from it if an event like this happened, and it worked. So that is one detail we know for sure. We don't know about the special collections. The fire started very near our special collections area, so that's high risk. Water's been draining down from the sprinkler systems throughout the whole 5-story building, so there's certainly going to be a lot of water damage and other things, smoke damage, of course. From an IT standpoint, we spent most of yesterday trying to relocate specific types of hardware, set up co-location centers. KU is providing us some space. We have a co-location deal with KU. Olathe here is providing us with some stuff currently, and we've been able to get our this morning we were able to get our wireless authentication back up for the whole campus. We were able to get our CAS infrastructure, which allows people to sign in. Our central authentication service allows people to sign into most of our hosted third-party services. Now we're working on bringing up the Shibboleth and other federated services that will allow us to bring up our internal services more. And we have a data recovery center expert person is arriving from Texas this morning to help us evaluate the situation physically, and the insurance adjusters are in the building at the moment. So that's about the best update I have for you there. Thank you.
So I think what's important about all this to know is that in the process
lots of our IT leadership back at K-State working 24 hours. We still have a great check conference going on here. So we appreciate those who are able to step away and be here. So anyhow, thank you. And without further comment, question?
Yeah, we have had lots of discussions about how awesome our check presentations next year are going to be. We got a lot of topics we're queuing up, and Greg, who was going to give this, he's our real champion of process for change and process for these things. And maybe it's worth saying that what we've evaluated so far is we've found that our data protection processes and schemes worked really well. Our data sort of save and recovery methods when an event is happening. Where we're struggling is business continuity, but we're having trouble returning things as quickly as we thought we could because we don't have that as well documented as we needed to. So I think you'll hear some stuff about disaster recovery in the context of change management documentation and knowing what you have in place. And maybe that's a great segue. The fire was on the roof of the building on the northwest corner. What kind of building? Oh, it's our library. It's a 5-story library. The fire started in the historic old part of our library. The library was expanded in the late 90s, about triple its size. The original hold area where the fire started, there was more in that area. So it's right in the center of campus and one of our biggest buildings. And
how's the data center in the basement?
yeah, the data center was in the basement, which is not under 5 stories of sprinkler water. It's not the best place for a data center.
And our help desk is located in the library, and so is my office. So
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of the folks that are here from our support and help desk, our client services and everything, they all were housed in the library. This morning, a lot of them are seeing pictures of the first time of their desk and their work areas. A lot of seals falling in.
it's not pretty.
Maybe not.
Yep. So good morning and welcome to Change Management is Good. Okay, you go first, okay? So change is something that we all deal with in IT. It's constantly happening. It's often hard to keep up. Sometimes we choose to change. Sometimes it's kind of imposed on us by changes in technology, by policies or leadership or emergencies. Yeah, all kinds of change coming from all kinds of directions. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. So for K-State, the primary goal of change management for us, there's all kinds of definitions. ITIL has a definition, but we've kind of come up with this tailored definition specifically for our needs, but it is primarily to increase transparency of the changes, all these changes that are going on in IT, while doing our best to reduce any disruptions that could result from it. So here's a little bit of our timeline so we use ServiceNow as our IT service management tool. So back in 2012, our information systems office started using ServiceNow for tracking all of their changes for the applications that they support. And so they've really been our longest users of our change management tool. And you see there's a long time between then and the more recent project that we undertook to kind of standardize that and apply it more broadly to all of our campus ITS.
Yeah, I would argue that we had a process in ServiceNow that was technical. It routed things, right, and you clicked approve or whatever, but we didn't have a process that people understood, right? We weren't involving the people.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's not that people weren't doing any of the pieces of change management. It's just lots of different ways, and it wasn't standardized.
It was a cold process that people hadn't bought into, basically.
Yeah, and so we wanted to kind of consolidate that and improve lot of areas. So we started out with a charter, and our committee or subcommittee for that, we wanted to get input from the people in IT who we would be making this process for.
Like a lot of you, our IT is somewhat distributed, and the way that housing and dining wanted and needed to manage their changes was different than the way library staff wanted and needed to, was different than the way we wanted and needed to. And so we had to consolidate that effort and understand with some real input of where the compromises could be.
Yeah. And we wanted to kind of measure where our current state was, what people were doing and what people were not doing. Such as different lines of communications that they would follow.
Right. Yeah, that's been a big problem for us, and how we communicate these kinds of changes was not well standardized, and that was a bigger part of the problem than we might have thought.
Yeah, because there's lots of channels through email, through chat rooms, through
announcements.
Yeah, announcements, meetings, Twitter, just lots of different channels. But we also wanted to get input as to what should our future state look like? What are the priorities that we should address? So we gathered that feedback. We presented it to leadership with our recommendations for priorities. And from what I understand, there had been attempts to make change management standards previously. And some of the feedback we got was that people were concerned that it would be burdensome, that it would be a big imposition. Our
previous strongest attempt at this was burdensome, and the postmortem of it, when it kind of dissolved, was too burdensome. We have to do something different. So a lot of people came to the table with that existing fear, that we were going to hold them up, slow them down, reject their changes that they knew were really important, and what do we know, that's their changes type thing. So.
Yeah. So we really wanted to create a process that would be simple, that would not discourage people from following it, essentially. So if we spend all this time and effort creating a process and then nobody uses it, that was a complete waste of time.
Absolutely.
It's difficult to implement something this big, and you see there's a bit of a gap between the executive summary and
the first time we really used it.
Yeah.
So we had a really dramatic power outage to our whole data center, in that we had a vendor supplied power backup systems that were wired in, and when we did the cutover, they were not properly wired in, and we had not checked that and tested that when they were installed to the level that we needed to. So we had to both back up our change management process and understand why we failed there, and then understand what we had to do for change management to actually deal with the situation. So we had two real-time events happening to us that landed right into the change management board and were parts of the process that we had thought about but didn't have all of the procedures for even.
Yeah. And so, it's not that we hadn't been meeting and discussing and trying to iron out this process, but we would hit dead ends, or we would, for some reason,
stall.
Stall.
We got to go back to doing other work, and we didn't, couldn't keep the conversation going.
Yeah, lots of different priorities, lots of different people asking for work in all directions. But those two major issues that caused widespread outages on campus. I remember days for hours at a time where I was unable to do hardly any work because internet access was affected or other things like that. But those provided a little bit more motivation for Greg, who is our change manager and the director of EST, Enterprise Server Technologies, to actually start using this process that we'd been developing for quite a long time.
And maybe it's worth noting that we had standardized on having our EST also be our release management people, So all of our application developer folks, for the most part, I shouldn't say all, but most of our application development release and update processes went through that group too. So they were able to automatically apply this change management process to our software releases at the same time as we were doing it to our enterprise technology.
Yeah, and so they kind of piloted our newer process in this limited group, and we were able to get feedback from them about what things were working, what wasn't, before we applied it more broadly, which is what we did back in February. We rolled it out to all of
and
IT.
required it
Yeah.
and it is now a required process as of February 15th for all changes. You'll see the scope of what changes here in a minute. But.
Yeah. So as part of the process of figuring out how are we going to do change management at K-State, we had to decide, so what's in scope and what's out of scope, what kind of changes? Because I mean, we could get down to really fine-grained detail, but if it's not providing any value, then we're wasting time and money.
And we talked about this a lot, if I again may interject, that we weren't falling on our faces, as I suppose most people that aren't doing concrete change management aren't either. We were generally being successful, but we were sort of running downhill without controlling our speed in a lot of ways. And that's the other thing that I think this really helped us do, was to take a more measured approach to it. Allowed us to stop the firefighting in some ways with something that everyone understood why we were stopping the firefighting.
Yeah. So primarily we are concerned with changes to our production environments that could impact multiple people. And I mean, you have lots of interconnected systems. You might think, oh, I'm just changing this small thing here, but it could have bigger impact that you hadn't even considered. And then also changes to sub-production environments that could have a broader impact. But those are much fewer than the production ones. Things that we decided to exclude, deployments, we're actually integrated those into a process so that creating the change records is done automatically as part of the deployment process. So other things, non-disruptive restarts. So I mean, some restarts might have an impact, whereas others are just. We
had spent some years between 2015 and 2018 here setting up our environment such that we could have as many non-disruptive restarts of our important systems, and to create as many places as possible where our continuous improvement style releases were silent to the users, were invisible to the users. And that feeds into why we're able to be successful at change management, as Michael was saying, because some of those existing processes, we're able to just roll right into this new change management process, and they dovetailed nicely together.
And the last two that you see that we're excluding, actually we added those after we rolled it out to everybody after our 90-day review. We noticed that people had some questions or concerns, and like we said, we don't want this to be a burdensome process, and if people are entering things that really aren't adding value, such as changes that an end user could be making, we don't need to record that if the end user can be making that change themselves. Or changes such as changes to group membership. I mean, those types of things are being tracked already in the system that they're in. That's not something that visibility is necessarily an issue with. So, and that just helps us to, yeah.
I'm sorry, maybe I could argue that centralized logging then is a piece of this too, per the point that we spend some time ensuring that the right pieces of data from the right logs came to a central place so that we could leverage that in the context of this change management as well.
So anyone who's familiar with ITIL, the IT Infrastructure Library, knows that they have different types of changes. And we follow that pattern essentially, except for we renamed one of them non-standard. So in ITIL, there's emergency, standard, and normal change. But normal is kind of an ambiguous word, so we just changed it to non-standard. And it actually took us a while before we.
Yes, it did.
There was some people want terminology that they can understand. They don't want to have some special knowledge.
Right, and rethink through the definition each time they try to apply it.
Yeah. But so the different types of change have different processes that they follow because there's different risk involved. There's different considerations that need to be made. So emergency changes they're essentially the same as standard changes, except for it's something urgent, something that you don't have time to take this to the CAB, to the change advisory board and get approval for everything. It's something that needs attention now. Standard, those are things that happen regularly, frequently, that are low risk, that can follow a standard procedure, that have rollback plans, things that are well understood. And we have some examples on here. Creating an F5 pool, heading system resources, permit firewall rules. And then we have non-standard changes. These are the ones that we really want to have more visibility into and to figure out what is the risk and should we be making this change and when should we be making this change.
Is that part, as you'd imagine?
So examples might include a deny firewall rule, a major version upgrade of an application, an upgrade that is known to be disruptive so that we know there's risk, but we want to manage the impact of that risk.
Not well understood, not just not well.
Yeah.
We're not well, but that's mostly about understanding.
And you also see we have disruptive restarts in there. So, so similar changes that might appear similar, such as restarting a server, actually can fall into different categories depending on the impact. So the person performing that change has to think through what they're going to do and the impact before they just jump in and do it. So I mean, really, that's the whole point of change management. We want to reduce the negative impact, which causes incidents to be generated, which takes up more time and effort to communicate and to correct those. So this up here we outline our basic non-standard change process. So do you want to?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
The CAB, the Change Advisory Board, it's a multidisciplinary group, and we meet and have the input from service that's collected through these change requests. And as we meet, we obviously make sure that we outline this set of steps that we should do each time for a non-standard change. Like I said, it's sort of the bread and butter of this group. So someone has to conceive of the plan and set it up and start communicating with the affected people from their side, letting them know that they're either planning this change or taking in the feedback about what the right timing of those changes, other things might be. And we bring all of that together in a request for the change. And the board meets weekly. We sit together, we of course talk it through, and then the board itself outlines some of the communications that should go out centrally to our main network operations center, for example, and that stuff starts to spread out. But then the staff making the changes, or the local functional people, communicate at that level as well. And then we actually plan and work through the change and communicate to folks and say we're successful, hopefully.
Yeah, so you'll notice that communication is mentioned in several of the steps throughout here, and that's part of what our new process was, to standardize that more instead of people just communicating when or where they thought best. Having a standard process where people can look at it and.
As you mentioned at the front, standardizing our process was a really important deal for this, of course, but what we really came to understand was, due to our decentralized nature, due to the way K-State's organized, again, as many of you probably are as well, communication was just pretty darn poor, right? We got to the right people sometimes, we got to all of the people sometimes, but we never really got to the exact set of people that needed to be communicated with, and with the functional groups doing it and central people doing it, and it just got messy. And so we worked hard, as Mark was indicating, sort of bake the communication part into there a lot, because IT people don't always think, we get focused on the technical parts, we get focused on our own internal communication pieces, but not always that. And so we really tried to emphasize that as part of this. And the NOC, Vernon Turner's the director of our NOC, and we've utilized that much better, I would argue, than
Yeah,
we had
there's
previously.
like number 7 there talks about Rocket Chat. So anytime changes are getting ready to kick off, they will pop into the NOC and let us know. So that way, if our help desk start getting calls, we're aware of what the possible issues are, so we can address those a lot faster. And then we can get back to the tier 3 support doing the change, letting them know that users are seeing these disruptions. So then they can look. A lot of times, recently we had an issue where someone thought they were taking out a firewall rule, and actually they did a deny. And so we were able to look into that log and identify almost within 5 minutes what the issue was, and was able to reverse that really quickly, as opposed to before. Sometimes that would take us almost all day to try and figure out. So we are seeing this process really working in these type of situations. And the NOC handles all the communication out to the campus community on these changes and statuses and those type of things. So we do have, like, we have our status page that we post, and that automatically sends out a tweet through our Twitter account across. So we have a lot of people following that. We even have people retweeting those announcements that we send out. So, and those type of things. We also have a K-State Today, which is a newsletter. A lot of times we know things are going to come up, we'll post that out there. So we try to use all the mediums that we have available to us to get these announcements out and keep the communication going. So,
saying leveraging the NOC to do the communications, another thing we realized was that we were overburdening our IT staff with the communications part of the job, right? We thought that was sort of a casual thing that we hadn't really understood very well. Oh, just message out to those people when you get the change in or whatever. And that turned out to be a really important thing to recognize, was what we thought were often just simple little things that were part of the process that the technical people might do, were turning out to be a big part of the problem. They're not communicators. That's not what their job is. They're focused on the technical things. And we had to recognize that we needed to change how we manage that communication differently, not, again, sort of overburden the technical staff with being in charge of that, basically.
another thing I'll mention too, every Monday morning I hold an ITS status meeting. We have probably over 20 managers and team leaders in that meeting. And part of that meeting is I go over the changes that are on the calendar for that week. So everybody is aware of what's going on throughout ITS in that meeting. And we also talk about what issues we had that week, what's the status, how was that resolved? So everybody's aware of what's going on within our environment.
So the next slide kind of drills down into the actual CAB meeting, the Change Advisory Board, where at first there's a review of the previous week's changes, and if there were emergency changes that they didn't have time to bring to the CAB, reviewing those, figuring out any failed changes and the impact, and just understanding things. How is our process doing? I mean, this is kind of a feedback mechanism, I would say. Yeah, and then also as part of that CAB meeting, reviewing the upcoming changes that have been requested, and determining the level of risk in these areas, the impact to services, to capacity and performance, security and compliance, financial impact, and all the resources that are involved.
And I would argue that this is another part that's really improved for us. We didn't, we tried to understand these things, the financial piece, for example, but now we try to put real dollar values that have backing and fact on these things. And we used to say, like lots of IT, well, we'll find the, well, that guy's surely going to be available, whatever. But now we try a lot harder to plan our people resources so that we're not overburdening folks again. Oh, we forgot you had 3 other changes today. We added you to this change too, type thing. We need to plan that more concretely, and that's one of the things this process has helped us do better.
Yeah. So implementing a new process. It can sometimes be a culture change, and there may be some pushback, but it does have value. And up here, I didn't come up with these exact numbers, so I don't know all of the reasoning behind it, but it gives you a general idea of how much cost or time is going into the overhead of doing change management.
We recently reburdened that $85 hour cost for our enterprise server technology team members, so we understand that to be a pretty accurate reflection of what our hourly were. That's people, equipment, software licensing, et cetera, that are necessary to do these things. And then the dollar figures on the standard and non-standard emergency are effectively our estimates of the average time. We looked at a lot of past data and got a good rough estimate of how much it took us to make these types of changes, and added the dollar value to it. And then we have, as you can see from the dates there, from when we started the change until somewhat recently that we could get figures, we've been trying to track and map this so we have a real legitimate understanding of how much it is actually costing us as a university to make decisions like, no, this change has to be done today. You can't wait to plan it. You must do it today. Don't wait till tomorrow, right? We can show details about what an emergency change costs us versus a standard or a non-standard change now.
So you'll see the standard changes. Those don't require too much overhead. They're things that happen on a regular basis. They're well understood. So they're not burdensome. They're just fill out the change form. And I mean, 2 minutes for many of them is a stretch. It's so even less than that. Non-standard, there's some planning involved. You have to meet with the cab. You have to have your ducks in a row.
So I was just going to say, you have to have your ducks in a row, by golly. We don't let you off the hook.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that does take time and that does cost a little bit more. But you'll see emergencies, which are not what you want. You don't want emergencies. You want either standard or non-standard, because the emergencies, they create fires, they have impact to other systems. This next one, so comparing back here, the total estimate for a year of these changes based on the changes that we've had since we rolled it out to everyone, 22,500 per year about. Compare this to
just that power outage event.
The power outage last year,
This was the first time we ever, I've been working in K-State IT for over 15 years. This is the first time with that outage that we ever fully surveyed the people impacted by this. We talked to the deans and we asked how their staff was impacted. We talked to the functional units, and we put quite a bit of effort, Greg's team and others put quite a bit of effort into quantifying what the actual impact to K-State University was of this power outage. We had not ever really put that level of scrutiny into it before. And that, allowed us to double down on, wow, this is so important. We have to manage this and we have to do this. We can no longer just wave our hand at it sometimes and just plow through. We just can't.
And so it says, that figure does not include the impact to faculty and staff. So
it's hard to quantify that one.
Yeah. So if I understand right, that's more the staff.
That's right. Functional people. There was some faculty there, like if a class couldn't be taught that day type of thing and some stuff, but we didn't understand the soft work impact on the faculty and students.
Here is a chart comparing our change requests to our incidents and our problems. So you see problems on the bottom. It's
pretty steady.
Yeah, it's hard to notice much difference on this scale. But then incidents on the top, you'll see that's steadily decreased. And change requests, you'll see, has increased since we started. And I mean, the scale from maybe a couple hundred to, 500. So I don't know.
And you might think, well, of course your incidents went down come about March or so, because you start to wrap down the semester or whatever. But of course, that's as we're getting into finals and things. And we definitely, the intent of this chart, although it maybe doesn't convey super well, we've been able to quantify that by managing our changes better. We're seeing less incidents come into our help desk.
Yeah, and here's another one that shows, you'll see the two tallest peaks. You'll notice that those are near the end of the spring semester and the beginning of the fall semester. But then you'll notice, so yeah, spring semester and then the fall semester.
And then the December drop off.
Yeah, December drop off. But you'll notice that this year,
that's the trend.
The trend has gone downward.
And I'm going to pepper in, maybe this is what you were thinking too, but unrelated to any of this, we also spent a lot of time, Vernon and his group particularly, helping work out our phishing problems. And that was a large amount of our incidents. So I would like to think that this chart also reflects that unrelated to change management, we were able to drop our number of incidents because we worked really hard on that part.
Well, one thing I was thinking of is if you see that spike in August, that was when we had that major power outage. So that would attribute to a lot of incidents and a lot of calls, and tickets being opened because people couldn't get the things.
Yeah, good point.
But a side note to what Scott was saying about phishing scams and compromised accounts. Last year we had over 3,000 compromised accounts. This year we're way below that. We're seeing an average of around 10 a week, where we used to be seeing close to 100. So a lot of that had to do working with housing and dining with the residence halls and that kind of stuff. So we think that was the only thing we hadn't done in prior years. And that's the only thing that we've done different that we can attribute to the lower amount of compromised accounts due to phishing scams.
But we're very confident that our change management process reduced our incidents. We have good data to show.
So some of the challenges that we face were, we have up here, getting buy-in.
Classic problem.
I mean, there's so many priorities. Which ones are the top priorities?
And when you insert a new process into people's work, they question it.
Yeah. But that's also important why we gauged in the beginning with our survey to gauge people's input and see where they were at and see what was really a priority in improving this process.
We had to take a strong hand. Like I said, we've been trying to do this, been trying to do it sort of casually and in a good old family way. And we had to put a board together, and the board had to have the teeth to enforce the process, and we had to be able to say, no, this has to go through it. We just had to, be strong. We wanted to be all buddy and let things go, but that's what we found that we just had to do, is we had to say, this is it. We have to follow it. We can put numbers on this, so let's do that.
Documenting our processes. We originally started, we were basing our documentation off of another organization's, but it was huge. It was probably over 100 pages.
Yeah, it's very.
But we reduced it down to, I don't know, probably less than 10 pages.
Yeah, I guess I don't know exactly either, but it's pretty short.
Yeah, and it's to the point, and it focuses on what's most important.
What I would add to that is when we were starting this process in the committee, the document that Michael's referring to is St. Mary's allowed us graciously to use their documentation and edit it to how we needed. So that's how we ended up kind of weeding it down to what we needed, but we didn't have to recreate the wheel. They had used ServiceNow too, so a lot of that documentation really kind of cut our planning time short in getting this process started.
And maybe in the interest of our 5 minutes left, as Michael has indicated several times, you could probably guess at a lot of that stuff. This is where our daily discussions happen, right? Well, I think my change is a standard change. Why are you guys saying it's a non-standard change? And just making sure people were clear on what these things really meant when we talked about them, because there is a lot of ambiguity still in those. And so we spend a lot of time ensuring that conversation is coordinated so that people are all on the same page, because that's, again, the real goal of this is to make the changes in a coordinated and organized way.
I think let's see, I'll just run over this real quick and see if we have any questions. So it's important you have somebody who owns this process, the change manager. It's important to make the standard changes quick so that they don't burden those who are filling out these
They'll never follow the process for the non-standard changes if they don't even like the standard change process.
Involve the biggest critic, get feedback from those who are concerned about the overhead, because they can really help you focus on getting to the point.
Put them on the change advisory board so they can help you recognize, and you can help them recognize what's going to work and what's not going to work.
As I said, we had a 90-day review, and we're going to put out another survey to gauge where we're at, what's working for people and what's not working. So that's something that we have in progress. We have a link to our documentation here.
And that we don't need to show you that link, but that goes to a very, very short half a page knowledge base description of what the change management is, who you should contact, and how to get started. So it's meant to be sort of the lower the barrier to entry.
So what questions do you have about change management?
So, pardon the pun, but who's in the cab?
So, right. So it's our technical leads from our enterprise service technologies. And I might get this slightly wrong. Greg will, I'm sure, tell me after when he sees the recording of this. But we have them sort of broken up into three groups. There's application folks. So there's a lead over that group that understands the application configuration and structure. There's a sort of the hardware level person, and that technical lead is on there. And there's the sort of infrastructure and networking and routing piece.
I can add to that, Scott,
Please.
If you want, since I sit on that.
Yes,
meeting
as do I.
every
So there's a
week.
number
So,
of us in there. I was going to go on there.
But I'm the NOC manager, so I sit in there, so I know the communication can update my staff. We have security in there. We have our database administrators are in there. We have our developers in there. We have all
We have
the
our
tier
we
three
don't have our developers in
hardware
there. We
guys
have
in
our development manager in there. We don't want
Right.
our developers in there.
Right, right. So there's a representative, usually the director or one of his representatives, if he can't make it, will be there. So all the areas of support centrally are represented in that meeting. So we discuss so that we know what risks there are between different applications and connections if you're going to make things happen. We've had to reverse back some changes, and that affected other changes that we were planning, so we would have to reschedule those. So the advisory board has really been real helpful.
And then I would add, we have an executive person, IT executive leadership person in there as well, myself or the ITAC director, others to sort of, like you said, kind of coordinate at the higher level.
Yeah, and Greg's the director for
That's right.
enterprise server technologies too, so he's on that executive team. So
good question.
Who outside of IT?
Well, that one got interfered with Scott. So.
Who outside of IT needs to see the analytics?
We, outside of IT, maybe that's not something we've addressed particularly. I mean, we are sharing the results of our analysis of what we're accomplishing with this with the CIO, and then he is sharing appropriate pieces with the executive university staff. But I don't know that I have a great answer for that. We may need to loop back around and follow up on that, because
Do you track time to resolution?
we do. We do. And the broader metrics that are coming out of this are shared at the president's cabinet, which is the deans, functional area heads like HR, those areas, and the president and his direct staff.
And the CIO.
Yeah, the CIO is a part of that, yes.
Which is something new. With the new hire, our CIO now is part of the president's cabinet.
For our CIO and IT staff has reported to the provost and a vice president for technology for the history of K-State. Only in 2017, we made a change to where the CIO reports directly to the president, and that has yielded immediate benefits in that the command structure is more appropriate for the university's business.
And that puts us out of time.
Okay.
So thank you very much. We have a
Yeah.
small.
Yeah, reach out to us. We'll answer more questions, of course, or they will. Aha, my name's not up here.
There's a small token of our appreciation to give to Michael, and we'll let you have Greg's. And Vernon, we'll catch up with you. Okay?
Greg, when
Thank
you watch
again.
this, Greg drinks coffee, so you can have the cup, but I'm keeping the chocolate.
Thank you very much.